everybody. Welcome back to Living in the Band. Today we're talking to Rick Lonow for part 2 of our conversation, talking about Cowboy Jack Clement, talking about Peter Cooper, talking about the notion of being in a band versus being a sideman versus being a session guy, and talking about chemistry and what it is that makes chemistry within a band and how that works and how that circuit is supposed to exchange information. Part 2 of our conversation with Rick Lonow on Living in the Band.
So Tommy's idea was great. The first album, if you listen to the first album we made, is called Georgia Peach.
Right.
And it's got several Flying Burrito Brothers songs on it because we wanted to remind everyone of Sneaky Pete's involvement. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's the same songs, but don't you notice how, they're still awesome and how important that, She's a Devil in Disguise, Christine's tune. Don't you realize it's the steel guitar that makes that song so awesome?
And those early Burrito recordings with Graham and Hillman and Sneaky, you don't, and maybe that's because Pete was going for something a little different than a traditional pedal steel kind of thing, but it kind of gets lost on those records that what you're hearing is actually pedal steel guitar.
I know.
If you're not paying
Christine's tune's a great example. It's so fuzz tone and everything. I didn't even know till I'm in the room with him when I first met him. It's like, he did that on the steel. It's those really thick fuzz tones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you've got people now like Robert Randolph and people like that who play. I just never really thought that pedal steel, presented itself well through a fuzz box because, I kind of fall into that trap of wanting to hear it in its natural form. But it worked for him. He pulled it off.
Yeah, I was talking with Russ Paul, the steel guitar player session guy here in town, and he wanted me to introduce him to Pete because he knew Pete and I were in a band together, and Russ and I have been doing some work together with Jack. Actually, I think I met Russ maybe through Jack. Anyway, he wanted to meet Pete, and he said to just drop in conversation, he orchestrates a track. And once he said that, I started piecing it together because Pete and I were working on a record at that time, and that's Russ dropped by the studio. And after he said that, I realized from now on, whenever I listen to how Pete plays, because it is interesting compared to how steel is usually done. I mean, here in Nashville, it's even a formula. There's which verse does the piano player do the fills on, which verse does the steel do the fill. Well, in the Flying Burrito records, the steel does the filling on every verse. Mm-hmm. The steel is just freaking everywhere. It's not like the way they make records now. But he's orchestrating the track too. It's not like he's getting in the way. He wasn't wired that way. Pete was very, very musical and very intelligent. Having been on the road with him for years, he's a brilliant man. I mean, was a brilliant man.
Yeah, and the world's a better place for him having been in it.
Oh God, yeah, great guy. Great guy.
Yeah, I was always attracted more to players like Sneaky and Ben Keith and even some of the trippy stuff that Garcia did. I was always more attracted to that kind of playing.
Yep.
And
Rusty's same thing. Rusty's a nut, man. Rusty's way out there, and was helping bringing the Leslie cabinets and again the distortion, all that. That's helped broaden the whole landscape of what that instrument does.
Yeah, I went to NAMM one of the first years after I moved to town, and I was standing at Bill Asher's booth, the guy that makes the lap steels. And while I was standing there, Vince Gill and Paul Franklin walked up, and we were talking for a while. And I didn't know that Joe Glaser was also a pedal steel player.
I don't think I knew that either.
Wait, do I have the wrong guy? The guitar builder, the loose
guy. Well, Joe Glazer's the repair guy. Well, I'm sure he builds them too. Sure, he builds
he came up with Vince and Paul when they were at the booth, and I started talking to Joe a little bit. He said, "Oh, so you play steel?" I was like, "Well, yeah." So who do you like? And I said, "Well, Toy Caldwell and Rusty Young and Ben Keith and Sneaky Pete and Buddy Cage." And Joe looks at me and is like, "Oh." So you're a hippie steel player.
That's what I was going to say. That's what Doug Moore calls it, hippie steel. I was on the session
I
with Doug
said,
Moore.
that is exactly right. That is what I am. I'm putting that on a t-shirt.
Hippie steel. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the the stuff that's kind of textural and not necessarily commanding your attention. I was always really attracted to that, and that's one of the things I loved about Lindley and the way he played lap steel. Is, when he takes a solo, he's
Jumps right in there.
But the rest of the time, you hear him on a track, and you don't even realize he's playing until it goes away. And it's like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But I can't imagine what it must have been like to be in a band with Garth and with Squeaky
Garth
at
and
the
Pete
same
was
time.
so fun. It was so fun. They're both not almost savants. Maybe Garth. Garth's so brilliant, and at times you just feel like, man, this guy doesn't need to be concerned with all the rest of the world. He's so, he's so brilliant.
That's kind of the thing. When he starts playing, he just goes away.
Yeah, he's got his own thing, which is so that band was brilliant. I wound up doing 3 albums, and I wish we could have been heavier songwriters and taken it super experimental. We were just trying to. We had record companies to please and trying to make all these suggestions that they're giving us to make something they can sell. And that part was hard because nobody's really a pop musician in that band. Everybody's kind of left of center, and trying to reel everybody in and keep them in what the record companies wanting to pay for limited us. I wish the songs maybe could have been stronger, but the playing was just fantastic. It was really fun to be on those.
Yeah, that's one of those things where you almost just have to say, you know what? There's no way we're ever going to sell this, so just strap yourself in.
That's kind of what it was, yeah.
And just,
the touring was great. We had a couple of guys, Paige Coffin, we were very fortunate to have a man that would help make it affordable, where he would have to slip us money every now and then just to keep us all going.
Sure.
And was perfectly willing to do that. Great guy. I understand he lives right almost next door to Richie Furay. He's from Boulder, Colorado.
Wow.
I don't know that but I've been to Paige's house, but I didn't know Richie at the time.
The world gets smaller all the time. So I saw Cowboy Jack Clement's name.
Yeah, I was Cowboy's drummer for a short while. I was.
I don't even know where to begin to ask about what that must have been like, because stories about this guy are legendary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was gone before I moved to town. I moved to town in 2014, and one of the things, Peter Cooper, who used to be a neighbor, he's, I don't know if you've read his book, but Cowboy is the first chapter in the book, and the first line of the chapter is, "He's the one you should have met." Of all the other characters in there, Don Light and everybody else, he leads off with Cowboy Jack and said, "He's the one you should have met." And I remember Marshall Chapman in her book said, Cowboy's house, the Cowboy Arms and Spa was right up the road, and the night of the fire, I saw it out the window, and I went up, and Cowboy was standing outside, and the first thing he said to me when I walked up was, "You want to buy a house?" And there's I don't know if it's still there, but there was for a period on Amazon Prime. There was a documentary called "Shakespeare Was a Big George Jones Fan."
Have you seen it?
I've got it.
I was going to say, I got 2 copies. Hold on.
I've got a huge collection of that stuff because, like I said, no tort law in here, all music stuff. That's all I've got room for. But yeah, I can't even imagine what working for that guy.
That was a lucky call for me. He was in a bind working with some young guy that wanted to work with click tracks and make a rock and roll record, but he wanted it cowboy style, but he wanted to be a rocker. He's from Detroit, and he wanted to make a rock and roll record. And I wasn't, at the time, I wasn't somebody on Cowboy's radar, but Jamie Hartford or David Ferguson, somebody recommended me. Somebody slipped him my name. He called me, and we worked great on that record. And then he used me for a while for that kind of stuff, the Pro Tools stuff that wasn't the normal Cowboy thing, but he had progressed to that. He had a whole Pro Tool thing going upstairs there at the Cowboy Arms Hotel, where he was going tape and Pro Tools, and was all set up for Pro Tools. So we did several records together, and not together. I worked for him. Sure. And then I was in the Cowboys Ragtime Band, which is a very cool thing. It was so huge to me because I moved here and didn't even know who he was. And then as I'm getting around, one of my lucky calls was Jamie Hartford called me to play in his band. I wound up being the only drummer in his band for 3 albums and a lot of years, and residency at Wolfie's down on Lower Broadway, maybe 4.5 years or something. It started my recording career because it became a very popular band, and a lot of producers and people started coming down there, and I started getting calls. And I think that it's all off of that, everything, that kind of stuff. But Jamie at one time had been, well, he would call it, he would say he went to Cowboy's school of recording. Cowboy took an interest, and he would do this all the time. He would take an interest in young people. He'd want to have them around, help produce them, help get some stuff documented on them, help them shop to get on the record label, because he believed that's where they belonged. Did that for Lily Mae Reich when she moved here with her siblings. They called themselves Gypsy. Cowboy took an interest. Lily Mae now is signed with Jack White's label, plays in Jack White's band. Anybody Cowboy had, Sean Camps was also going to the school of recording at the same time Jamie was. They both have become somebody.
Yeah.
So when I would do demos, when I first met Jamie, we would do them at Cowboy's place, but not with Cowboy. But I've been introduced to Cowboy, started being around there, and then one thing led to another, and it was years later that I got that call to do recording work with him. And then I was working with him when the house burned down. I was that's the period when I was with him. He's pretty old at that time, but he's Cowboy Jack Clement. I went to Memphis with him, played outdoor with the Cowboy Ragtime Band, did some cool stuff with him. Played here in town a bunch of times with the Cowboys Ragtime Band, and did recording with those guys. Did recording with just his session guys, which were all the coolest guys in town.
Yeah, that's one of a handful of names that, if you mention that name and somebody's head turns a little bit,
It should.
They're for real.
It's the guy turned on the tape for Jerry Lee Lewis. It's like, that guy.
Yeah.
You heard Great Balls of Fire? Heard of that one? That guy.
But there's a whole crop of people here who know who Dallas Davidson is, but don't know who Cowboy Jack Clement is, and it's a sign of the times changing. But I'd rather hang with the other crowd.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky. The Hartford connection was strong there because John had worked with Cowboy, and Jamie had worked through John probably, and then I'm sort of through Jamie and a few other guys I got to know through them. Anyway, it was short-lived. It was maybe a couple of years I got calls to do stuff with Cowboy. I already knew Peter. Peter wrote me one of the best reviews anyone ever wrote, where he talked about a record I played on with Jamie Hartford and mentioned the drums, and mentioned the drummer, mentioned me by name in the paper, in something that was, in syndication, and they usually don't ever mention the drummer, So me and Peter will always be friends because he did me a great thing there.
That dude is a Nashville treasure as far as I'm concerned, because he has a reverence for the history of this town.
Yes, he
that's
does.
hard to come by.
He does.
That piece that he wrote in The Scene about the night that String Bean was murdered.
Oh, I read that. Yes.
I've read
Fantastic.
that a dozen times.
Yeah.
Because it's both terrifying and impossible to stop reading at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the way that he wrote that piece, he's taking you through chronologically what happened that night, from the time that String left the Opry till he got home. He's talking about, okay, who's on stage at the Opry singing what as the things that happened in front of String Bean's house were happening. And it's a masterful work.
Yeah.
And it's one of...
He's a great writer.
I read everything he writes if I can get my hands.
I remember now, I actually met him. I was working for another guy named Victor Messesny. I did 3 records with Victor. That was a very cool ass band here in town, with all Stick Davis playing bass, that Charlie Chadwick, Jeff Coffin, the all-star cool band.
Well, you've been in a few of those since you've been here. You were in the Kemosabe's with Dave Pomeroy.
Yeah, Ricky Ray Rector. Yeah, I've been real lucky there, real lucky. And I'm a band guy. I just like to be in bands.
Yeah. Well,
the session thing was the lucky thing that I would get any calls, because I really came to just be a band guy, but lucky to get to play on a couple records at the same time.
Yeah, I've always been more interested in playing live than in doing sessions. And I've done... especially back in Philadelphia, I've done tons of session work, and there's still guys there that call me. But there's something about getting up and playing in front of people. You do a session and you might play on a song that you're never going to hear again in your life.
Yeah.
It's hard to form any kind of an actual bond with the material unless, it's somebody that you've got a history with. If you've got a history with them, you can go in and you kind of know what they're going to throw at you. But if if you're just getting a call for, 3 songs, on Tuesday afternoon, you're going to go in and play them, and you may forget that you ever did the session in the first place.
Yeah.
But there's an adrenaline about playing live that's always been my favorite thing.
Well, the band process too. I like the chemistry that happens. It's one thing to be in those bands. I'm in a band if I'm on a recording session. That's the band I'm in today.
Sure.
And so that's a band, but the chemistry that happens when it's the long range thing where you got to travel together, you got to be in a van together, and you got to go long distances and talk about stuff that's actually pretty boring, but you talk it to death anyway. And I mean, when you're in a band with somebody for 4 or 5 years, they know me as well as my kids know me. That's
sure.
They've had to hear all my stupid stories as often as my wife has by then, and vice versa. And you really have these great friendships and great chemistry things that happen. And we're all just, at the end of the day, we're doing it to do the music, but the chemistry that comes from that makes the music different too.
It absolutely
as you
does.
get to know each other. And you and I are going through that now, where I just knew as soon as I met you that there was going to be chemistry there. And that's what, Poco's a band. And what we do is works on a chemistry level. And it needs to be that because we're not just session guys that are so good that we're that too. We're so good we can come in and play these songs, but you don't want just that. You want to shake up. You want that
It's the
chemistry
difference
thing to
between
happen.
having a one-night stand and getting married, and I use that analogy a lot.
Good one,
because when you're in a band, if you're in the right band, it really is like getting married multiple times over. Because you've got to be in the same place. You've got to be able to relate. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to tolerate one another's little idiosyncrasies that might drive other people nuts. You've got to be able to walk out into the world as a united entity. You've got to, because it's not just one dude and the sideman that he picked up for a gig.
Yeah.
It's not just, you've got to have some kind of a connection there. And, it's not just a musical thing. Anybody can get up and play the notes. You've got to be able to elicit a response out of the other guys you're playing with, because that's where that chemistry comes from.
Yeah.
When I hear you do something cool, or, when we hear Jack hit a harmony, or when, Rusty goes off on one of his pedal steel tangents, that's why I show up. That's the thing that keeps me coming back.
Yeah.
Is, because once you get a taste of that, it gets addictive and you want to keep chasing it. And, if you're in the right band, you know that there's going to be something that's going to happen over the course of the night that's going to make you happy.
Yeah, well said.
We didn't even really bother to.
You did turn it on, though, right?
I did turn it on, but I didn't do an intro or anything. We just started talking. So
well, you're going to.
I hope you guys don't feel slighted by that. And I feel like we've probably gone on for I don't even know how long.
You can't show them all this. This was too long. Yeah, it seems like we've been here for a while.
They'll be fine. Thanks for sitting in with us, y'all. We'll talk to you later. Now we're going to talk about shit we don't want you to hear.
Yeah, here come the curse words.